Thank you, Joey. And now we are concluding the first session that was more theory, culture, ideology related. And we are moving into the part that's more practice oriented. It's applied studies in interpreting, actually. So it's going to be cross-disciplinarity and interpreting. And we have two presentations. And the first presenter is Itzel Sanchez, yes. And she'll be talking about working memory in healthcare interpreting. So please. Itzel. We need to change the. Diego.
They can help.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Too smart, girl.
Yeah. Way to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can have more questions to Chawai during the reception or other presenters, but Itzel.
Okay, so thank you all for sticking around this long. And as I have a presenter, my name is Itzel Sanchez, and I'm going to be talking to you all a little bit about working memory and healthcare interpreting. So a little bit of personal background information. Prior to coming to this program, I had worked as a medical interpreter. Back home at the local hospital, I went through the training. And through my experience, I witnessed or observed not only communication issues in between the patient and the provider, but bigger issues associated with interpreting, such as specifically, this whole semester I've looked at training and how that probably affects interpreters. And so I heard about the program, and that is why, a little bit of why I am here, kind of to explore those situations that I had faced or kind of observed as being out in the field. So my question to you all, why do we need interpreters? Mostly for those that may not be a little familiar with the field. Why do we need interpreters? Any thoughts or ideas?
To provide basic services.
Okay, yeah.
It's sometimes hard to say what something means in lay English and have a doctor go, oh, well, that means something. I think a good interpreter can serve as a bridge for that, helping the doctor make sense of what the patient's saying, but at the same time helping the patient make sense of what the doctor's saying. Mm-hmm. Because hearing medical terminology, you kind of get cross-eyed and go, huh? What does that mean to me? I need it in plain English here.
Yeah.
But if you'll pardon the use of English here.
Any other thoughts? Carol?
I think she took mine. To overcome the language barriers. Sometimes you don't even speak that language at all. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, as we have learned in the first semester, the roles of the interpreter and what the interpreter does, basically facilitate communication between those two parties that do not speak the same language. So in 2010, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, LEP, or Limited English Proficient Individuals, account for 90% of the population in the United States over the age of 5. And what the interpreters do in the medical setting, specifically, they limit health disparities for these patients. They increase adherence to treatment, and they also help with increasing satisfaction with care. And as we have all learned, the profession is growing because there's more cultural diversity in the U.S. So another statistic I found that is really interesting is that by 2016, there's a projection, specifically for the Hispanic population, that they will constitute about 31% of the U.S. population as a whole. So a little bit of overview of what I'm going to share with you all today. I'm going to start with some background information, specifically studies that have been done. And then I'm going to present my research question and my hypotheses. I will then go into the methodology that I used, which will lead to the results, and then to the discussion of my results. So what is working memory? Working memory is a brain system that provides temporary storage and manipulation of the information necessary for such complex cognitive tasks as language comprehension, learning, and reasoning. And just to keep you all a little alert throughout my presentation, I'm going to be throwing out random words, and I'm going to ask you at the end of my presentation to recall those words. So we can do a little bit of experiment within our group here, because we do have professional interpreters and people that are bilingual. and even those that are not bilingual. So my first word, I'm not going to say, I'm just going to randomly say it at the end of my slide. No, protecting our memory, Joey. So for this time, I will let you know my first word is yellow. So specifically for my research, I looked at this model that Giles created in 1997, which he suggests that in interpreting, these 5 processes require working memory. So we start with the analysis process, which is understanding the source language, whatever language you are going to first start working with. So if it's English or Spanish or French, you obviously have to understand what is being said. So then you go into reformulation, which is the switch from the source language to a target language, specifically the lexical forms or the codes associated with the sentences that are being said. And then you have the storage of information and the working memory, which basically says that the input sentences that you have heard are going to stay in there until the translation has been produced. And that clearly is going to lead to the production, which is the planning and the performing of the speech. And lastly, the control is going to analyze everything and make sure that it happens in a coordinated manner between the 2 linguistic codes, so that you make sense when you're producing in the target language. Sorry. And so some past studies that have been done in 1995, Padilla found that professional interpreters do have a larger working memory capacity than non-professional interpreters. And she looked at interpreters interpreting students and bilinguals. She performed a classical span task in which they had to recall letters or words that they heard. And this is what her findings said. In 2004, Luo found no difference in working memory capacity among subjects, and she tested for experienced interpreters, advanced students, and novice students. And she found that there was no difference, but that there was a difference in their performance. And so another quote that I have found that I've included in my study, Mizuno agrees that healthcare interpreting involves tasks that require working memory, resources such as listening and comprehension, obviously, information retention, retrieval production, and monitoring almost concurrently. So, nor professional or ad hoc interpreters have been subject to testing in this specific cognitive area. And why did I choose these specific subjects? Professionals go through training. They obviously in that training they acquire specific skills that are needed for interpreting. Whereas ad hoc interpreters, for those of you all that do not know what ad hoc interpreter is an interpreter chosen by chance that has not been through any training, might be a family member or a bilingual staff member. Excuse me. And so a quote that I found in 2006, Hage said that interpreters who received no training performed well in the translation of simple, non-complex sentences. However, they failed to convey critical content when more sophisticated communication skills and medical knowledge would have been needed. So my research question is, do professional interpreters have a higher working memory capacity than non-professional interpreters? And that led me to my null hypothesis, which states that professional interpreters have a higher working memory capacity than non-professional or ad hoc interpreters. So my participants for this study, I used 3 professional interpreters that have been working in the healthcare field for more than 2 years, and each of these subjects had gone through some kind of academic training in interpreting. My ad hoc or my non-professional interpreters were also 3 subjects. They had been working in the healthcare field on a voluntary basis, and they had received no academic training in interpreting. And heart. So the methodology that I use a listening span test because this had been used in past studies done by Padilla or Luo and a few other researchers. And they said they used this because it kind of relates to interpreting, so you're hearing information as opposed to other studies, other tests like the reading span test where you're just reading the information and then recalling it back. To conduct the study, I did it for about 20 minutes. There was a series of sentences that they would hear, And of those sentences, they would have to determine if what it was being said was true or false. So like, Jim Bob goes to the gym on Fridays. Well, that's clearly true, right? And then they would hear a letter at the end of the sentence. And this would go on for about 4 to 7 sentences and letters at a time. And at the end of that series, they would have to recall in the computer the letters that they heard in the order that they heard them. And so I took all of this and recorded it, and I used a one-way ANOVA test to figure out my results. So I first looked at the overall test scores of the subjects of the whole test. And as you can see, the ad hoc interpreters had a mean of 96.3, and the professionals had a mean of 90.3, which gave me a p-value of 0.21. And I also looked at the correctly recalled letters as a group. So you can see here the professionals had 2.6 versus 3.67, and that was for 4 letters that they recalled, and this was at the end of the test. And then 3 is what the average was score, and then 5 for the ad hoc. That was for 5. And then 7 correctly recalled letters. We had the professionals that got 4 correct, and then the ad hoc interpreters got 3. Although the results did not support my hypotheses, an interaction was found between the professional interpreters and their enhanced performance, specifically for major processes that require working memory resources, such as analysis, reformulation, and the storage of information. So as you could tell, the professionals scored, on average, higher recalling 7 letters than the ad hoc interpreters. Some factors or variables that could have affected the study. It was a perception of the test, and these are observations I made when I was giving the test to the subjects. The ad hoc, which were students, they saw it as a challenge. They're like, okay, let me get a high score on this test. Let me get this done. Whereas the professional interpreters, one of them was studied during work, or the other one was tested after work. So they kind of saw it as like, okay, let me get this done, kind of sort of deal. So I also noticed their concentration. The students were very focused on getting the letters correctly done, or the professional interpreters could have felt information overload because they're usually not used to being evaluated on their performance. Frustration related to memory retention and the length of the test was also something I noticed with the professional interpreters. And they're like, okay, when is this going to be over with? Is this almost done? And those things, especially frustration and concentration, can affect your working memory when you're completing a test. So for future studies, I would recommend using a larger sample size to actually represent the data across boards, and also look at different tests related, well, not just related to interpreting, but more in depth of working memory. I also wanted to complete these, but because of lack of time, obviously I couldn't carry them out. So there's also the matrix span test, the free recall with articulatory suppression, and the classical span test that can be used to test working memory. And hat. Okay, are there any questions? Well, first, does anybody want to try to recall the couple words that I said when I remember to say them? There was 3.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she said.
She said all 3.
Yeah.
You said on 3?
Oh, yeah.
Yellow heart hat.
Yellow heart hat. Good job.
It was very smart of you to keep us paying attention.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
With the order that you did the letters, the 4 and then 5 and then 7, I think, did you incrementally increase, or in what order did the participants take that task?
It was random, so they could receive 4 one series, and then 7, and then there's also 6. I just didn't include everything in there. 6 and then maybe 5. So it was very random. It wasn't in order.
Okay. Then I have no comment. I have a comment if it were in order.
On that, just to follow up, because you're talking about that experiment, that part of the experiment. How long was it? So how many sentences did they have to deal with?
It was 15 series.
There were 15, and you said it took them about how long?
20 minutes.
About 20 minutes? One thing if you didn't do in the statistics is add the trial as as a blocking factor, because I would imagine that people would get worse at this over time. And that may extract some noise, and it might be better. I didn't see how many participants you had in the first place.
There was 6 in total.
Yeah, no, you need more people regardless, but on top of that, trial would be an important thing in this kind of situation.
What are the other factors that might have affected the working memory just before our simultaneous final?
Stress,
Yeah? Wow. But the physiological ones?
getting enough sleep.
Yes. And?
Well, if they've been working all day, they're probably already tired.
Caffeine deprivation.
There could be an effect too of knowing the researcher. Maybe the students didn't know you as well as your interpreting friends, or
No.
not a factor. Okay.
And age is another one.
Yeah. Because
This for working memory.
Yeah, there was a question
Yeah,
that
there was,
I
yeah.
didn't put it at.
because we discussed it, the students beat the interpreters in every category. Because they're younger, they have good memories.
No, but not in all. In one, the professionals were better in 7
7.
words.
7.
Yeah.
Seven
Okay.
words, the professionals were better.
And also, do they know what you're going to ask at the end? Do they know that you're going to ask the letters? Or do they?
Yeah, the procedure was explained at the beginning, so they knew that they had to recall the letters at the end of the series of the sentence.
All right,
Thank you.
great, thank you.